Hey there, friends, and welcome to this episode of SelfKind with me, Erica Webb. It is episode 288, and I thought that I would use this episode as a bit of a reflection on the year that was 2024 and some projection into the year that is 2025. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the lessons that I learned in 2024, and many of them were very hard won, I will just say that, and talk a little bit about my word of the year that I'm choosing for 2025, which is something that I've done for several years in a row and I really find quite supportive. So, how are you? It's been a big time in, holiday land. Christmas and all the things have happened, and I hope that you navigated them as best you could and you have come out the other side feeling hopefully relaxed. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about a lessons from 2024 today, and also talking a little bit about what's to come in 2025. I'm going to share my word of the year, which I find a really powerful process or practice, and a little bit about what else is coming in 2025. So I have spent 2024 in survival mode, without a doubt. 2024, particularly the second half, was definitely about survival mode. And if you've listened to the podcast for a little while, you've probably heard me talk about some parts of why life has been challenging, but you probably haven't heard it all. And it's interesting, one of my core values is honesty. And I've found myself feeling like I haven't been completely honest, and that is not true. I have been completely honest, but I haven't shared all of my life on the podcast or anywhere, and I think that's a very fair thing to do. However, I also know when to pay attention to the little niggles inside of me, and I'm like, you know what, I want to tell you part of the story. I want to tell you a little bit about what's been going on. I'm not going to tell you the whole thing because it's a very long story, but I'm going to share a little bit of that with you. But some of you who've listened before will know that my mum has frontotemporal dementia, and she's been sick with that for a really long time. And maybe 18 months ago, she moved full-time into an aged care home. She doesn't speak. She no longer walks. She's very unwell. So that was challenging in and of itself. And then back in June of 2024, my sister and I very innocently took ancestry DNA tests. And we learned some very shocking news that the father who raised us isn't actually our biological father. So the second half of 2024, I very much spent trying to reconcile this information, learning that I was the result of donor conception, kind of dealing with all the stuff around that, and essentially feeling like I've had to rewrite my story. So 2024, safe to say, top 3 hardest years of my life. Really, really tricky. I had several periods where I just wanted to quit. All the things. I wanted to quit it all. I wanted to just get in bed, pull the covers over my head and be done with all of it. I wanted to quit my business. I wanted to quit the podcast. I wanted to quit everything. And those moments didn't last very long because there's something that always pulls me back. I don't know exactly what it is, but something always pulls me back. And so I didn't quit, but I did have to push pause on a lot of things. I didn't focus on building up my clientele. I didn't focus on creating lots of content. I missed a few podcasts. I missed lots and lots of days and sometimes even weeks on social media. It was my year of kind of just keeping the wheels turning. It was very much a year of survival. And that, I think, it's not in my 10 lessons that I'm going to share today, but it's a really important lesson that sometimes surviving, that's enough. And it depends on what stage and phase we are in life. I had been through hard times before this. And sometimes I think when we get through a hard time, we think, okay, good, I'm done, right? Life, I've got this sorted, everything is fine. And then out of left field, something comes at us and we're like, I didn't plan for that. What's happening here? But coming to recognize that is just how life functions sometimes. And the most important thing that we can do sometimes is just focus on our survival. So 2024 was that for me. So I had these periods, right, where I thought I'm just going to quit everything. I had periods of shutdown. I had periods of intense anxiety, I was having some silent panic attacks, which were really unpleasant. And despite all of that, there are so many lessons that I learned and relearned in 2024 that I'm very grateful for. They feel like they came, you see them at some of those memes where it's like, this is me coming out of 2024 just like all bloodied and bruised, and it does very much feel like that. But it's like I got a trophy at the end because I got some lessons that I'm very grateful to have learned. So I'm going to share some of those with you. There are so many more than 10, but I was sharing this on Instagram as well, and I thought 10's a nice little round number. So I'm going to share 10 of them, and the rest of them probably will become apparent in future episodes. So I'm going to read a little bit from my screen. So these are the ones that I shared over on Instagram. I'll expand on them a little bit, but 10 of the lessons that 2024 brought me, often on repeat, things that I learned or experienced in a new way, even if I've experienced them in the past. And that first one is that nothing can stop life from taking twists and turns that you never expected. You can't. Having the tools to navigate those twists and turns, that's the magic. Because I see this sometimes with clients too, right? Where there'll be like a speed hump in the road and they're like, but I thought I was good. I thought I was fine. And then this thing happened and it turns out that my anxiety came back and my fears came back and then Yes, because we're humans living in a very complex, imperfect human world. And so things do happen that we don't plan for. And the best thing that we can have at our disposal is the tools to be able to navigate it, not to expect that life will never have those twists and turns, because that's probably not going to be true. Number 2, things work out better when I ask what my sensitivity needs from me rather than how I can overcome it. This is huge. And this is something that I think I learned in a really big way in 2024 because I was so often overwhelmed. I was so often overwhelmed by my own internal experience that my external experience, like my tolerance, was quite low. So this is the year that my family got instructed not to be brushing their teeth outside of bathrooms. I didn't want to hear anyone flossing. I didn't want to hear any mouth sounds. My tolerance level was really just quite low. And so knowing what my sensitivity needed from me this year was so vital. It needed quiet a lot of the time. It needed sometimes to be distracted and numbed out with things. It needed nurture. It needed more from me probably than it's ever needed before. And knowing how to honor that rather than just trying to be like, I shouldn't need that, was a huge part of my sort of latter half of 2024. And that was a big lesson that I think I've been learning over time, and 2024 really brought it home. Number 3, I cannot control anyone else's narrative. Therefore, spending my time worrying about how I'm perceived is futile. Better to be led by my values than my anxiety. This is one that I never saw coming. Never saw this coming. And it's also the first time that I've really been able to go, you know what? I actually cannot control what other people think, what other people say, or what other people believe about me. And for the first time in my life, I don't actually care. Like, I want to be liked, right? That's a huge part of any human experience. We want to be liked. We want to be understood. And sometimes that just will not happen. And so this has been a massive, massive lesson of 2024, and probably the biggest one that I never saw coming. I mean, I'm jumping around a little bit. Some of these are lessons, you'll see what I mean when I say this next one. I adore the freedom, number 4, that comes with a flexible schedule, but that flexibility can also be overwhelming. I do better with structure than I'd like to believe. This became very apparent in 2024, particularly as it related to my business, because I am very much I'll do what I need to do when I need to do it kind of person. I don't put a lot of structure in place for myself. And it turns out that that's not actually probably my best move. I crave structure even though I resist it. And so 2025, I am going to put more structure in place for myself because I like the security and the safety of the guide rails of structure. And yet the other part of me is like, don't put me in a cage. I don't want to be told what to do and when to do it. So finding that flexibility between structure and freedom is a huge part of sort of nurturing my sensitivity, because you've got the safety element of the structure, the guide rails, and for me too, the safety of my own like being able to do what I want when I want. That's it's almost like two little children arguing with each other. I want to do what I want when I want, but please also make sure I go to bed on time, right? Like it is quite a funny little dynamic, but that's something that I've learned in 2024. Number 5, knowing the signs of overwhelm before they become overwhelming is a skill worth honing. I can only interrupt a pattern that I can recognize. So sometimes the experience of overwhelm in one's body becomes the very thing that kind of tips us over the overwhelmed edge, right? We become overwhelmed by our own experience of feeling overwhelmed. And so one of the most kind things that we can do is recognize when that is starting to happen so that we can pull back, right? Put the brakes on, kind of change that reality for ourselves before it becomes completely, runs off the rails. And that has been, like I said, it's been little things for me this 2020 in 2024, but it was like little things like, please don't brush your teeth near me. I don't know why that has become such a problem, but it is something that I just cannot tolerate. And so, being like, well, I need you to go back into the bathroom to do that thing because I find the sound of that is creating intolerable feelings in me, right? So I could also leave, but to be fair, teeth brushing should happen in the bathroom. But it's little things like that, or knowing that I was feeling really overwhelmed by the amount of work that I had on my schedule and finding a way to sort of deal with that overwhelm without going further into it. These are really, really valuable skills. And these are the sorts of things that I spend a lot of time working with clients with because it's not that easy. It's actually not that easy. But once we start to find the things that we can pay attention to and then what we can do in response, it makes it a lot easier. Number 6, speaking up for what I want and need is far more effective than hoping the people around me will read my body language or my mind, because most people can't do that. Now, this is a really interesting one as highly sensitive people because we are very good at reading people's minds and reading people's body language. We have made it like our whole MO, right? I can tell when somebody is cold. I can tell when someone needs the bathroom. I can tell when someone's sad. I can tell when we need to change the topic of conversation because somebody's uncomfortable. These are skills that highly sensitive people are very, very good at because we have learned to be the puppet masters in those scenarios and change what we're doing or, change the dynamic in order to keep other people happy. We're very good at it. Other people are not. And so your facial expressions, your body language, your subtle hints to try to get people to do things differently, they don't work because people don't pick up on them the way that you pick up on them. Also, it's not very kind to be using those sorts of techniques. We want to be clear and we want to be kind and we want to be direct when that is appropriate. And so I have found that I'm much better at that at the end of 2024 coming into 2025 than I ever have been in the past. Oh, please stop rubbing my back. I don't like that. Oh, please take your toothbrush back into the bathroom. There's that example again. I need to go and sit by myself for 5 minutes. I need to eat this particular food for dinner tonight because I just know that that's what my body needs. I need, whatever. Speaking up for our needs. Now, this doesn't mean we don't compromise. I did lots of compromising in 2024, and I'm sure I will do plenty of it in 2025. It's not about railroading the entire family or workplace or dynamic anywhere with only what you need. Of course, we have to compromise. That is part of being human. But we can't rely on the subtle clues. We have to actually speak up. Number 7, pausing is a gift. Big pauses, small pauses, just pausing is a gift. And I will be doing more of that. I found myself craving just the stillness of a pause in 2024. And I took that mostly in the form of like 5 and 10 minute meditations, where I literally just sat quietly. I didn't listen to anything. I just sat quietly. And that just saved me in 2024. But also the ability to pause on the podcast when I needed to pause on social media when I needed to pause on saying yes to social activities when I needed to, pausing before I spoke, pausing before I responded, pausing before I made decisions, just pausing, such a gift. Number 8, my feelings hold clues as to what I really want, don't want, value and fearful of, etc. My feelings invite my curiosity, not my judgment. This is something that I've been working on for a really long time, but I think that, again, 2024 brought so many of these lessons into very sharp contrast, and paying attention to our feelings without judgment, or at least acknowledging that there's judgment there and then getting curious, it can just change everything, because instead of making ourselves wrong, instead of assuming that we're right, we can be curious and we can be like, I wonder what that's pointing me in the direction of. So curiosity about feelings, super important. Number 9, multiple things or feelings can be true at the same time, even when they seem to contradict each other, and knowing that is powerful. So this can come up a lot around boundaries, and this is probably where it came up the most for me in 2024. I can be compassionate and still hold a boundary. I can be sad and angry. I can be confused and clear. And those things sound like contradictions. Yes. And welcome to being human. And number 10, it's okay to be comfortable. It's okay to be comfortable. Good luck. No, that's a joke. We are comfortable often, but it is also okay to be uncomfortable. Heavy feelings are human. Meeting myself with compassion means I can tolerate that discomfort. I spent so much of the latter half of 2024 being uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable, it felt like 99% of the time. And genuinely, the thing that allowed me to be in my discomfort and be okay with that to some extent was my capacity to meet myself with compassion. Because then there was nothing to necessarily fix about it. It was just, this is just how it is. And that's okay. And I will be okay. And I will get through it. And so often we will, if we think about the people pleasing thing, or how we are very good at reading other people's body language and needs and blah, blah, blah. Part of the reason, and I've done a podcast episode about this in the past, part of the reason why we do those things is to remove the discomfort from our own body and our own mind, because we can't kind of tolerate the fact that somebody else is mad or sad or uncomfortable, whatever. And so learning how to sit with our own discomfort, you hear this a lot, but I think it's hard. It's a hard one to comprehend. It's a hard one to really understand until you do. And then it's like, oh, that's what that is, right? Grief will do that to us. We don't have a choice. We are uncomfortable. And what I would add to number 10 is that discomfort can exist in the midst of joy. Joy can exist in the midst of discomfort. Grief and joy can coexist. It's that whole idea again of contradictions and finding, glimmers of joy in the midst of sorrow. And the more that I was able to hold space for those contradictions, and the more that I was able to hold space for multiple sort of truths at the same time, the easier it was to hold the discomfort. So that was a really big lesson. So there are 10 of the lessons that I learned in 2024. And like I said, there were a lot of lessons. It was probably one of those years that I could write a book about, and I might. I intend to do a lot of writing in 2025. So I'm going to segue now into talking a little bit about 2025, but that's one of the things that I find myself really called to do. I don't know that many people know this, but being a writer was always my biggest dream. It was my biggest goal. When I was a little girl, I used to think I'm going to be a famous writer when I grow up, and maybe even the youngest ever published author. I am now nearly 42 years old. That dream is not going to come to reality. I'm not going to be the youngest published author ever, but my goal is still to publish something at some point. And so I'm just going to start writing again a lot in 2025. I went back to school when my kids were really, really young and got my master's in writing, thinking that that would be the proof that I needed that I could do it. Spoiler alert, chasing more letters behind your name often doesn't work out the way that you think it will. So anyway, putting pen on paper in 2025 is going to be the thing that changes that. So I wanted to talk about one more thing before I wrap up this episode, and that's word of the year. Do you do that? I have done that for quite a few years and I really like it. Sometimes I forget my word, not going to lie. But I do really find it a powerful practice because it gets me thinking about what's most important to me this year. In that way, it's quite similar to knowing what our values are. But back in 2024, my word of the year was intentional. one of my top core values is presence. And to me, being present means being intentional. And being intentional was a really important thing I wanted to take into 2024, partly because I felt like I was often pulled around by my sensitivity to do things that I didn't necessarily want to do, or say yes when I really meant no, or no when I really meant yes. And so I really wanted 2024 to be a year of being intentional, and I think that word served me really well. 2025, though, feels a little different, and I was going to go with the word express because I want to focus on more writing and just speaking, right? Because part of what has been really tricky about 2024 was feeling like I couldn't be all of myself because I wasn't sure how to share that story. I'm still figuring that out. But 2025, I want to be a year of expression. But express didn't feel quite wild enough. It didn't feel quite powerful enough. So I've actually landed on a different word, which is unleashed, which I really like. When I saw the word, I was like, I felt something in my body. And I was like, that's the word, because it's creating something in me that feels really important. It's the energy that I want for 2025, to break free from constraints, to fully embrace who I am, to be in my full potential. So that is my word for 2025, unleashed. And I'm going to put a second word on there because I was like, I still need something that is about expression. And so I am going to also have like a sub word, which is articulate. I want to be unleashed and I want to articulate. So they are going to be my 2025 words. We will see how that comes together and how it ends up feeling throughout the year. I wonder whether you have a word for 2025. I would be so curious to hear it if you do. Come find me on Instagram, share it with me. I would love to hear from you. Or if you're on YouTube, you can just stick it in the chat box below. But I would love to know if you do that, or if hearing mine has inspired you to think about your own. I'd also love to know what your 2024 lessons were. They might be little tiny lessons, little baby lessons that just felt, kind of, that's good that I came away with that. Or they could be these big, the sky's opened kind of lessons, and I would love to hear both. So please do come and share with me. What else for 2025? I talked a little bit more about that on the last podcast, so I won't go into too much detail, but I feel like I'm I'm not back to, I don't think I'm ever going back to who I was in 2024, but, or the first half of 2024. But I feel more focused now. I really had to pause, as I said, for a while there, but I feel really ready to actually kind of like hit the ground running, gently, because I don't really run. But I feel ready to be unleashed, right, in 2025. And so there's going to be lots of really awesome stuff happening. Anyway, I think that's it. I think that's all I want to share today, but I hope some of those lessons resonate for you as well. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your lessons. I'd love to hear your word if you are having a word for 2025. And I'll be back soon with more stuff about how to be a highly sensitive person in an often rather unsensitive world. I'm glad you're here. Talk to you soon.